structuring Nellie's early business ventures. I think that's the first I heard of you, JD, was that Nellie connection, including Apple Bottoms Jeans and Dirty DERRTY Entertainment, Dirty Entertainment. JD followed his time with Nellie by joining the African Hebrew Israelites, who I've just mentioned, of Jerusalem to learn community buildings based on health, peace, and sharing. In 2017, JD achieved his doctorate, Mazel Tov, in organizational psychology and became heavily involved in white anti-racism groups in Los Angeles and later in St. Louis. This work in anti-racism, reflecting on what he learned throughout his journey, inspired him to write Race for What? His book that has come out recently, Race for What? A wise thinker and guide, JD dares white folks to stay the course to finally correct the harm of racism and help create a humane world. Please help me in welcoming Jesse JD Mass.
Yes. I grew up in University City off of Colgate and Princeton and Warder, basically. So in the University City area, though. So real quick, my plan, the book is half of it is a memoir of my journey, places where I recognized race, racism, differences, and some of the issues that even just the differences. Racism, different. Okay. and so part of it is 7 steps that I developed for healing the harms of racism and moving into a place of humanity. And so I want to open up, though, before I start, with a clip from Jane Elliott, who has been doing this work for quite some time.
I want every white person in this room who would be happy to be treated as this society in general treats our citizens, our black citizens. If you, as a white person, would be happy to receive the same treatment that our black citizens do in this society, please stand. You didn't understand the directions. If you white folks want to be treated the way blacks are in this society, stand. Nobody's standing here. That says very plainly that you know what's happening. You know you don't want it for you. I want to know why you're so willing to accept it or to allow it to happen for others.
I feel the same way. That point is the struggle in the healing process, right? We all know it's a problem. When I run into people while I'm driving Uber or anywhere else and they start to say somebody discriminated against them, and them being white at this point, saying someone of color discriminated against them, they provided racism, and I start to ask them, well, would you want to be treated the way that they are? And immediately it's no. And so I wanted to know from a young age, having experienced what I experienced, what is the psychology and the emotions behind wanting to do something racist, wanting to prejudge a situation when you're coming in based on the level of melanin in someone's skin. And that curiosity was spurned at an early age. So I'm going to just go a little bit through some of my journey. My parents, who are sitting here, oh, by the way, Jesse Mass is my name. JD is what I go by often, and I'm also known very much so as Paula's brother. So my parents grew up in Clayton, Missouri, and wanted to raise their children around a more diverse upbringing than what they were raised with. Specifically, also to know and understand and experience life within a Black community as well. And so they intentionally moved us into areas. I was born in Philadelphia. We were in an area that was rather diverse. When we moved here, I was 4 years old, and we moved right next door to who became my best friend and best friends. It was brothers, mother, aunts, uncles, and grandparents living in the house. And from day one, I was welcomed. And I also got to experience my parents welcoming my friends into our home. And so there was this very open door policy, open front door, open refrigerator door, open kitchen doors. It was a very just welcoming environment. And I didn't know how rare that was until I started to grow older. When I was in the 3rd grade and we had to learn about Dr. Martin Luther King and his teachings, it made sense to me. I didn't understand why he was so famous. And so from that point, I started to open my eyes. Well, does not everybody think this way? Because this was naturally how I was raised. And so from there, I started to see, no, the rest of the world oftentimes doesn't think this way. No, there were times when we were walking through different areas, coming home from the Galleria, where we were stopped by the police, and the stories that the police came up with just to tell us why they stopped my friends and I were pretty far-fetched. I also learned quickly that what I naturally took for granted in the ability to speak to the police was not the same that my friends had been taught. So as we were being held, told that for close to an hour about how someone had had their house broken into and we fit the description, and it didn't make sense to me, finally I got tired and I said, look, we'll help you. And my friend said, no, we won't. And immediately I learned that I wasn't taught that there's a way that a police approach people of color differently. So there was one day that I really remember when my grandmother's cousin had a 90th birthday, and I was at the party for her, and it was in a very nice establishment, and we were drinking tea and had our pinkies in the air and talking about who invested in what and what college my generation was going through, and I was in college at the time. And as I left there, I just remember there was a lot of feeling that I had to live up to a certain standard in order to be in the room comfortably. And then I left and I drove 20 minutes away to Tower Grove Park, where my best friend's family was having a family gathering. And I got called names as soon as I walked in. I got bear hugged and I got noogied, and I got, we went out and some people were shooting dice on the streets, and we were just talking trash about what we were gonna do tonight and making fun of one another. And I just felt welcomed however I showed up, that was how I was meant to be there. And it was a very comfortable feeling. And I thought to myself that day, I'm experiencing something very few people get a chance to experience in one day, let alone, but in a life often. And that's what set me on a path of wanting to do something different, wanting to bridge the gap that segregation has created. Well, as time went on, I saw this movie. We'll see a clip of it, not now, not yet, but Armageddon, and it talked about blowing up this crater that was coming towards the earth from the inside, that if we shoot something at the outside, we don't hurt it. But if we can drill into the middle of it, we can blow it up from the inside, and that's the only way we'll stop this. And so I had practices of using my less melanated skin to get privileges for my friends that they were not able to get as we were growing up, returning clothes and other things of that nature, being stopped by the police and being able to get us out of trouble. And so I wanted to do something in the finance world and go into the system, not tell anybody about my background. And as I moved up the ranks of banking industries, I would dismantle it from the inside, and that was my goal. But as I started that journey after college, one of my closest friends became an international music star, Nelly. And he started wanting me to be involved in helping him with entrepreneurial projects. And I remember thinking to myself at that point, while I was working with him and we were developing these businesses, that this would be my chance to make it up the ranks to influential people. I could call anybody, and as long as I started the sentence off with, "This is Nelly's business manager," I could get anyone on the phone at that time. And I remember thinking, this will be my chance. But also what I was doing while I showed up was I was putting my white savior kind of uniform on, and I was going in and I was making decisions after speaking to him and him saying, "I want things to go this way," and I was like, "No, I got better ideas." And in that, whether my ideas were right or wrong actually didn't become the point. The point was that I came in knowing better instead of valuing him and what he wanted in his vision. And at times, that created an opportunity for some of the trust that we had built from our childhood to be broken. So after he and I stopped working together, through his uncle, I met the African Hebrew Israelites that Rabbi Randy spoke of, and they were inviting me to come to Israel. And I never paid attention to news at all growing up, unless Paula was on it. And so I took all my cues from my dad, and if he didn't want to go to Israel, I didn't want to go to Israel. And my grandmother, his mom, approached me and said, "Hey, my friends and I are going to Israel. Would you like to come?" And I was going through a divorce and some hard times, and I said, "Absolutely, I would go. If you're not afraid, I'm not afraid. Let's do this." So I reached out and spoke to Amikam, Nelly's uncle, and he invited me to come there as part of a 12-day trip for 3 to 4 days. And when I mentioned that to my grandmother, it became a severe negotiation, and I was able to negotiate about a half of a day from that trip. But in that half of a day, I got to see a level of humanity that I would have only thought was a dream. When we arrived, they started to they fed us some delicious vegan food, but they also started to take us on a walk so that we could see the village of peace. And as we were walking, I said I had to use the restroom. And they told me, "You can just go into any home and just use the restroom." And I thought, yeah, that sounds nice. So we kept walking. And as we kept going, the prince that was taking us around said, "Don't you have to go? Go up to that door and go in and use the restroom." And as I went to knock, he said, "I didn't say knock." As I peeked my head in, I heard this voice, "Hey, baby, you need some water? You need some food? What do you need, the restroom?" "Yes, the restroom, water be nice." And I come back out, and I'm going, and I felt that was really different. And then as we kept walking, a 2-year-old child came running around, and he asked, "Are you going to the park?" And she just kept going, and there wasn't an adult in sight. And I'm looking around, my grandmother's looking around, and he realized we weren't going to move until we knew she was safe. And he said, "Look, the entire village is her home. We teach them as soon as they're old enough to walk. There's more eyes on her than you know, and everybody knows whose child that is." And that feeling of peace resonated with me, and it made me want to be a part of growing this community. It also I introduced my sister, who is Kaya, and she moved there and has been living there ever since. It helped bring her from a state of depression, working in the school systems in Los Angeles and just not being able to have the influence she wanted to have, to a place of healing there that that really resonated with me and my family. And so through the process of working with them, living in Los Angeles, we had a vegan food company, and I ended up meeting who became my son's mother. He was 6 years old when I met him, and she and I spent 8 years together. And during that time, she had done a lot of community work, gang intervention out in LA, and she said, "It's great that you know what you know, and it's really great that you love us the way you do. But if you want to help us, you need to go fix your people. Stop hanging out with us." And I said, "Ugh, okay." Didn't want to do it, but as Donald Trump was starting to rise in popularity in the primary of the Republican primary race, I heard about a organization called White People for Black Lives, and I thought, I'm one of them, let's go. And I ran out and started to work with them. And I met some great people, had some great relationships there. And I also realized that there was a lot of people there working for somebody and not knowing how to work with them because they didn't know much about the folks that we were supposedly there to help heal the harms of our ways. And so in that, I challenged a lot of folks, and I also realized that there had to be a more effective way that I could be a part of it, and that's really what led me to wanting to write this book, Race for What? And me not being the writer in the family, I looked to someone to help me write the book. Initially, I was partnering with a ghost writer, and he ended up asking me, the first question he asked me was, what are 6 steps it would take for you to see a change from this culture? And so as I started to talk about those, I added the 7th one, and I'm going to go through those now. And step 1 is that we don't take a step. So often when I became vegan, I was running out and I thought the world was, going to end unless everybody became vegan because I was zealous and ready to go. And so often when we have these aha moments that racism still exists or something still is going on, we have this sense of responsibility that it's on us to fix, and it is much of that on us to fix, but we don't have any of the tools or knowledge of what that looks like and what something different looks like. And so as we're running out, it's time to say, whoa, let's learn something, and maybe even unlearn some of the things that we've learned. So I started to think about why. I'll go back to my childhood. What was the most, what led folks to develop a system of racism? And that's what it is, right? It's a system. Capitalism is a system, socialism is a system, communism, well, racism is a system. And so what led us to develop that? What could have been the sparking emotions behind that? And as I started to look at where the natural resources are in the world, they're mostly populated in areas populated by people with darker skin than us. And where we found ourselves in these northern regions with a less melanated skin, and I keep repeating that term because when I hear the word white, it makes it seem like we were painted something and someone else was painted another color. And when you start to think that you have less of something than someone else, it's hard to make you feel superior if we develop this white supremacy sort of mentality. And I wanted us to untangle some of those emotions behind that. And that was part of what step 1 was about. What in these regions where there was less resources, what developed for us in a scarcity sort of situation? In a scarcity place, if we had only 10 plates of food here, given that we're all fasting properly, Rabbi, I promise, when this is over, we either would learn how to share those 10 places or how to find other work and work together, or quite naturally, we'd often start to think of ourselves and we better grab as much as we can because there's only a limited amount of resources. And that leads us to seeing each other as competition instead of as connected, right? The Shema teaches us that we're all connected, and yet we've developed an individualistic independence kind of idea that we're not one, and so we're competing with one another. And I look at our economics that I was taught in school, and we're taught about this scarcity as the basis for which we make our decisions. And we're taught that see others in our industry as competition and not collaboration. We're not connected, and we have this very, me type of me first mentality. And as I look at when we hear stories of going into other countries where we needed resources, whether it was India, whether it was Christopher Columbus coming here, they speak of people being willing to share, because in an abundance, and recognizing that there's an abundance, there's not the need for competition. There's more than enough, and it's a natural process to share. So we came in, and even though we recognized it, having not healed ourselves, I feel like we came in and we brought that same scarcity mentality that made us see them as a competition and not as another human being that we could have a relationship with. And hence, we developed a term called race. Race sounds like a competition to me. And so Dr. Claude Anderson taught us that the idea of race was that European countries were racing to dominate and colonize the world. And so this idea of competition is so ingrained in us that even as we start to look at how we heal the climate, one of the great proponents of climate is the guy named Tom Steyer, who ran for president, and one of his first tweets was, "Great, now we can compete for who does the best in healing the climate. Now America can be the leader in changing that." And I started thinking, why do we have to do that? That's not changing the way we need to change to heal. And so as I went through that second step, it was to really acknowledge that harm. What harm do we do? What is the other harm? Yes, we have anti-black racism that's prominent, and that's at the heart of what I'm hoping that we can heal. But also, we have a cultural practices that are just harmful to us all, that doesn't have anything to do with the fact that we have white skin or less melanin in our skin, but it's just the practices of a culture. And if we could learn different practices and start to learn something different, maybe we could change those. And I call one of those practices playing God, right? We have manipulated certain things in our life, right? We manipulated an atom so that we could come up with nuclear weapons. We manipulated food so that we could come up with ways to make them fit into an economy. And yet, as Karen was pointing out earlier in this system already worked. Whether you want to call it God or the term creator, life already works. We didn't have to do anything other than participate in it. And indigenous cultures know that around the world. It's not that they weren't able to develop guns. It's that they didn't want to as much as we did. That it wasn't a fit for a humane world that has an abundance and willing to share. And so step 2 in acknowledging the harmful ways of our practices leads to step 3 for me, which is to let that go. If we can learn to let go of our desire to control, if we can learn to let go of our desire for our privileges, and learn to let go of the fear that we're facing as we're letting those other two go, then we can open ourselves up to something beautiful. But if we're scared and we're holding on to this control, then we don't have room to acknowledge step 4, which is that other cultures are valuable as well. If we can appreciate those values, going back to the financial term, if we can appreciate the value of other cultures instead of depreciate their value in our society, then healing them through an act of reparations actually has value to it. It's not just a cost. And so as we start to look at step 5 being the reparations process, step 6 would be being led by a new mind, and step 7, having that new mind take us to a place of humanity. And I have a little clip of why I think step 6 is important, and then I'm going to focus on steps 4 and 5 and open it up for questions. But if we can play the Armageddon clip of why I think the Armageddon one.
6 billion people on the planet. Why'd you guys call me?
We need you to prep the team we're sending up. We'll send them to the asteroid. They'll land, they'll drill a hole, they'll drop some nukes, take off and detonate, if we can fix this equipment problem.
Yeah, the drilling unit's a prototype we've been building for the Mars project. You might recognize the rig.
Yeah, well, I guess I should recognize it. My design. Did you steal a key to the patent office?
Yeah, basically.
Let me get this straight. I got pulled off an oil rig flown halfway around the world because you stole my drill design. Couldn't read the plans right and did a piss-poor job of putting it together.
Well, technically, patents don't apply to outer space.
Just shut up, Quincy. It's not going to Mars anymore. I'm just going to try to save this planet. And we need to know what's wrong with it pretty quick. You said we did a bad job of putting it together?
No, I said you did a piss-poor job of putting it together. First of all, you got the flow system all reversed. Let me guess. You've been tearing up rotors and you can't figure out why.
Yeah, that's right.
Well, that's because your cams are all wrong, Mr. Wizard. Who's been operating this thing?
Right there.
We've actually we've had them training for 8 months solid now.
8 whole months?
Well, pretty much, yeah.
Oh, gee whiz.
Well, this is the team that has to do the job up there. We need you to train them down here. Well, Mr. Stamper, what do you think?
You know, drilling's a science. It's an art. I'm 3rd-generation driller, doing it all my life, and I still haven't got it all figured out. I assume you sent for me because somebody told you I was the best. Well, I'm only the best because I work with the best. If you don't trust the men you're working with, you're as good as dead. And you want to send these boys into space, fine. Sure, they'll make good astronauts. They don't know jack about drilling. What's your contingency plan?
Contingency plan?
So the reason why I chose that is because here we are at NASA with some of the most brilliant minds from our education system. And rather than humble themselves out and ask for the help, they tried to do it themselves. And that's what I don't want us to do. I want us to learn something different and not put it on our own backs to do it for somebody, but learn how to do it with them. And so as I look back at step 4 and 5, that being appreciating the value of others, if we could really learn and to take a step back and appreciate others without it having to affect the way we feel about ourselves, right? Because that's part of what the journey has become, and is feeling guilty and sometimes shameful of our past. And those are natural feelings, and I definitely don't want us to put those aside and ignore them, but I don't want us to sit in them either or be afraid to go forward knowing that we can't. So as I looked at how do we appreciate the value of others, there's been numerous ways to do so, right? But one of the things is to even look at, as horrible as we behaved in the slave system, we went and got people that knew how to farm. And we had to value them enough to want to go through such a system of manipulation, right? We didn't just beat them. I know we hear about we just beat them into a submission, but we raised children. We did so many actions of intentional harm because we valued them enough to go through this whole process of doing so. But we don't see that as value. So if we can start to shift how we see our values, right? When I look at the healthcare system, we don't value the people that are actually taking care of the patients. near as much as someone who came from my degree in finance gets to go up into an office and look at charts all day of numbers and say, no, this decision needs to be made. No, this decision needs to be made. And the business person, gets to take home the larger check. The valuation system that we have is based so much on how we've learned to value money instead of how we've learned to value each other. But when I go into Black communities, I've gained so much from a welcoming standpoint. I've learned so many different things that I value in my life beyond what I've sort of learned in books, and even more, there was a movie, Hidden Figures, where these same NASA folks, probably the same actors, couldn't figure out how to do some of the accomplishments that we're so proud of without these Black women. And yet we don't still, for some reason, we don't want to just value that and value the people as we're learning to work with them. How do we appreciate that value? Because we spend money all the time. You spent money to come here, and this was a valuable experience, or you wouldn't have been here. So if we're looking at healing the harms of our ways through reparations, and we look at what is it going to cost us, well, it's going to keep costing us more if we don't associate a value to that makes us feel good about the costs associated with that. And could we even see the value of our own role and our own healing in that process, right? When I look at it, a mentor of mine told me, if somebody was walking across the cross street right there, crosswalk, doing everything legally, and a car came and intentionally ran them over, there would probably be really severe injuries, right? Let's imagine your back, your legs, your knee. We're going to need your surgical help. And yet, we don't see that happening and go, could you get out of the way? The rest of us have to go. Could you please move? We didn't do that harm to you. Move out of the way. There's a healing process that goes into the injuries that are caused to that individual. There's a legal system that brings forth some sort of monetary healing, but there's also participation. The ambulance that shows up, the people that witness and even call the ambulance, the doctors that help perform surgeries, and the therapists that help with the physical therapist healing. There's such a healing process that goes on. When athletes are injured, that same type of healing process goes on, and it may include at times rest, and it may include setbacks, and it may include all these different things, but there's a part of it that we could all benefit from, because the people that do the job of the EMT, when they save a life, they get to benefit as well. It's not just the life that they saved. The doctors, I know, I live with one. She benefits from the process of being a part of the healing process for somebody. It feels good for ourselves in the connection that we have, because we actually get to live the Shema, whether we're conscious of it or not, that we are connected to this healing process. So there's much more to it than just the cost and the effect that it's going to have on the Black community. It's going to have an effect on all of us. That if we start to participate in the repair process, that we would all benefit, right? The physical therapists, all of those involved. And that person may never walk the same again. But without it, we can't just let them lie in the street and tell them to pick themselves up by their own bootstraps in a system that's all about competition anyway, and expect that over time the healing will just happen, and then we'll be able to continue the competition and go, you got the same legal rights as us. It doesn't work that way without that healing process being a part of it. And that's so much of what the Yom Kippur service is about. That's so much about what our rabbis have been teaching us since I've been coming here for 30 plus years. it's so much of what we talk about, and I just want to bring a connection to the idea that racial justice could be done the same. Because somebody asked me what was being anti-racist versus, not anti-racist, what does it mean to be not racist? And what I learned in the community, in the Hebrew Israelite community, is it's really tough to go protest and make change. But they're less afraid of the protesters that are trying to make the change than they are of the community builders that are making the change, because that's something different. So when I start to think of what is racist, well, I operate in a racist system. I went to St. Louis U, I'm a Billiken. I went to U City High, I'm a Lion. I'm a racist. But if I want to be not racist, then I have to build something different. And that means also participating differently. I don't have to be the leader as a white man of privilege. Even though it was mine to cause, that my folks caused a lot of the harm, it doesn't mean that I have to be in the leadership position. That service position is so valuable and is so meaningful. And we want others to be in that, and we value them when they're in that service position. Me moving into a place of servitude and learning from another culture on how to be connected is valuable to me. And that's what I wanted to share with you all today. So if there's questions or...
Probably, I'm going to violate my own statement, but if people want to come up to the microphone and ask a question, only because of the people on the screen, only to hear, they're not hearing me right now. So if you want to ask a question or say a comment for Jim.
So we have another mic coming around.
I'll be the guy. I like being Phil Donahue.
All right.
I know, it's a theme. Does anyone have a comment, a question, a thought, a sharing for JD? And by the way, again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
And you will tell everyone how to get your book if they want to get the book, because that's important for all of our education. But does anyone have a question, a comment, a thought, something to share? Oh, yep. Mrs. Elliott.
So you talked a little bit about trying to get people to see the system and their role in it. And one thought that has noodled in my head for a long time is the idea of saying to people, well, if you're sailing a ship through a storm and half the crew isn't trained because you didn't feel they're worth training, you're not going to get through the storm by cutting off that half of the ship with them on it.
Right. That's a beautiful point. I might steal that in some of my trainings now.
Thank you. Anybody else with something to, yes?
Just what you mentioned at the end about, like, you know, not being as scared of the people protesting and asking for change, but the people who are making the change, reminds me of the story of, I'm like forgetting the exact details now, but the city that bombed a community that was making amazing change. It was a wonderful community, and they bombed it, started a fire, and let it just burn out. I think that there was two different instances. Yeah, that's the one. There's a group that's thinking of, and interesting about that, how they were so terrified they bombed their own city and destroyed, you know, over 60 homes because they were so terrified of people making the world better.
Right. And that's the threat to the system, right? That when black communities, even in segregation where we've controlled the majority of the resources, have still thrived, they weren't thriving to get back to us. I know that you'll hear folks say that sometimes our fear is that they're going to do to us what we'll do to them, what we've done to them. And that's never been the case. There's no signs of anybody walking into a white church and just shooting that up. That's not a part of their culture. And yet we've gone in as they're rising in Rosewood and in Tulsa and for Black Wall Street, and we've burned down and torched and bombed these places. And so, I mean, that's kind of fitting to roll the last clip, Daniel, sorry. Oh.
I'll go find out.
All right, well, but yeah, that's like, that threat of peace, huh? Yeah, the peace is a bigger threat than showing up to.
Have a good day. Be kind to your neighbors. If you see a sign that says Black Lives Matter, say out loud, white friends. Sure do. Watch how quickly things start to change in the country. White people, if you're scared about Negroes, I'd like to remind you of something. That anger and that rage that you think will one day be unleashed upon white families, you've been waiting on it for 400 years. We're better people than that. I know what you heard. Thugs, animals, monsters. Nope, better people than that. Not only can we do better, we want to do better, we are doing better. And you're free to join us.
So
We have time. Yeah, let's do one more. Mitchell.
I was just wondering if the state of Israel had any more respect for your community that you were involved with than the last time we visited.
It does not appear to be much, and that's another example of people that came to just develop a level of peace for themselves and demonstrate peace according to how they interpret the words of the Hebrew writings in the Torah. And within that peace, it brings a threat to the Israeli system, which is our European systems that's continued.
So I'll do a couple things. Let you wrap up how you want to wrap up. I want to make an announcement about something that's coming up with our friends from the African Hebrew Israelite community. That's coming up in Sukkot, and then let you know what's ahead this afternoon. So JD, and then.
Okay, so right now I'm developing a program that'll be offered through the Anti-Racism Academy based on the 7 steps, and I hope to take it to colleges as my #1 target, because I think that age group is where the greatest opportunity for impactful change is. But it will be a large level 1 for anti-racism work, and then scaled down to even do diversity, equity, and inclusion training work. I'm also looking at developing a volunteer program to go into the inner cities. In Compton, this is being done, where people come and volunteer and help do outside work, landscaping, painting of homes, buildings, things of that nature, to beautify the community. And it also gives a chance to really start to see what's going on if you don't go into these communities, to meet people, and there's levels to which I would like to bring community building around that, and see what kind of change can come from that. So that'll be starting soon. But right now, raceforwhat.com, it's FOR, raceforwhat.com is where my information about my book is, and I'm online writing blogs and making videos, and it can be found at Left Bank Books and at Amazon as well, as much as that bothers me to say.
Thank you again, JD Mass, a friend, part of our family. You know, you're right, repentance. That word is doesn't belong just to Jewish people, right? So, yeah. I mean, repentance is the work that you're talking about, another way to frame that. And so this is our day to, it's not the only day for repentance, but it really is our grand day to sort of bring us back to that place where we know we have work to do. So this is right on point, and just really, I'm glad that you we're able to share with our community, your community, and especially, talk about the book and what's coming from the book to start to make those repairs that so desperately need to be made. I did want to announce we have a group that's been meeting at CRC, really started when we were in lockdown and the synagogue was closed, but a racial justice circle. We've mostly met on Zoom. It's been a really great group, and for many years, probably 15 years, we had a Seder with CRC folks, both Jews of color, our whole community, and in cooperation with the African Hebrew Israelite community, who are mostly in Israel, in Dimona, what JD talked about, but also there's a satellite community in many cities, including St. Louis, and we've become very close with a group of African Hebrew Israelites here in St. Louis. And we did how many people have been to the Seder we've done over the years? Really, with great vegan food and great fellowship and a real commitment to being friends with each other. So it's been a few years. And so we didn't want to wait till Passover. We opened up and we couldn't do the Seder last spring, and so we decided to do something in Sukkot. So on Thursday, October 13th, our sukkah will be up, and everyone's invited, and many members from the local African Hebrew Israelite community will be here as well. Adina, who you might remember, often lit candles with her husband Eliasa, has started a vegan catering company. Our own member, Jasmine McCurry, had her she got a master's degree recently, had her graduation party here. And I noticed that it was the same food we ate every year at the Seder, but it came from a company. So Adina has started her own company. We're going to have main dishes from Adina at her company, and people are invited to bring potluck. It could be vegan or vegetarian. It'll be labeled for people who are strictly vegan. And it's 6 o'clock. That's probably coming up, isn't it? Thursday, October 13th. It might even be a week from tomorrow. Okay, that's good. I'm glad I reminded myself. And again, in line with what JD is talking about, to really get to know each other and to connect to each other. You're all invited. So what I want to say now is, it is about 3 o'clock, and I just saw Rabbi Dale came in here for a second. She will be heading over to the church right now if you want to join her with a text study, The Enduring Reality of Impermanence. Ooh, I have a great song for her. And then also at 3 o'clock, Sarah Ann Patz, another member of CRC who's doing spiritual movement. That'll also be in the church if you want to get moving a little bit. And then at 3:15, also in the First Unitarian Church, our voting rights Havara. There are members of that Havara who just left to get ready for their breakout session. So you've got 3 choices in the 3:15 zone. And then if you want, back here at 4:30 to conclude Yom Kippur with Yizkor and Nila. Any questions? So everything else for folks that are streaming, there are no more breakouts on the stream, so we'll see you back at 4:30 because the last services of Yom Kippur will in fact be streamed. So again, thank you. Thank all of you. I hope it's a really meaningful rest of the afternoon. And keep up the good and holy work. There's a lot of it that's needed. Amen.
Thank you.